All right, so today we have a treat. We have my old friend Hjalmar Gislason, founder and CEO of Grid, which you can find at grid.is. So their tagline is bringing spreadsheets into the AI first era. And a more detailed description on the website is AI is transforming the way we work. Spreadsheets are the foundation of business. Grid brings them together to unlock new possibilities. So, with that long winded introduction, Yalmar, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ben.
And let's start at the beginning, which is basically so people know about spreadsheets, right? So, but let's start from the beginning of your journey here into AI. So, what problem are you folks trying to solve? What's the specific problem?
So if you think about all the workflows at an organization that rely on spreadsheets, odds are there will be quite many, and maybe especially on the business side of the house, where people are using spreadsheets to take care of everyday IT needs without having to go to IT to solve them. So spreadsheets are these wonderful, versatile tools. But the thing is that these workflows are out of reach for AI and automation at the moment because spreadsheets aren't running in a way that lends themselves well to speaking to them using a natural language or automating these workflows.
So, there have been this wave of spreadsheet startups, right? So the most famous, if our listeners are familiar with, is Sigma Computing.
Mhm.
So can you just give our listeners an overview of the spreadsheet landscape? So obviously there's Excel and Google Sheets, but let's set those aside. So what is this new wave of spreadsheet startups, including you, Grid?
Yes. So obviously, Excel and Google Sheets are kind of, I tend to refer to them as the traditional spreadsheets or traditional spreadsheet vendors or solutions. And then there has been a host of a new wave of spreadsheets that have come out. Spreadsheets didn't get that much of an attention for about a decade or two, but then in the late teens or around 2020, we started seeing some spreadsheet companies come around. Grid is one of them, but we also saw companies like Rose and Equals, Spreadsheet.com, Sigma Computing, as you mentioned. They all have a slightly different flavors, and I think I can maybe put them in two or three categories. So one are people that are trying to reinvent the spreadsheet itself. They're trying to replace Excel or Google Sheets as the application you use to build out the spreadsheets, where you build the formulas, where you do the calculations, where you type in the data, and so on. So I'd put Rows, Equals, and a few others, Spreadsheet.com also in that category. And that is all well and good. And in many ways, what I would say what those companies are doing now, and to some extent what Excel and Google Sheets are doing as well, is that they are bringing AI to spreadsheets as they've always been. We, on the other hand, we're bringing spreadsheets to AI. So we believe that people will continue to build, especially models like the modelers. They will continue to use the traditional spreadsheet software to build their spreadsheets. But then those spreadsheets and spreadsheet models need to be accessible to people using natural language, using AI, using automation. And that is what we do. So we take the spreadsheets that have been created with a traditional software, we turn them into web services, scalable, reliable web services with a RESTful API endpoint that you can then run as a part of any AI integration or automation that you want. So that is kind of where we differ. You mentioned Sigma, so let's also talk about them. There is an important distinction also in the spreadsheet world between everybody listening to this will recognize this immediately when I say it. There are almost two types of spreadsheets. There are the spreadsheets that are almost like databases. They're columnar in nature. Every column is an attribute, and every row is an entity or a request or something of that some sort of transaction or something like that. Sigma is very much in that category. They are a spreadsheet-like UI on top of columnar data. They can do calculations, but they're columnar calculations. Instead of like the free-form models that people build in spreadsheet software, especially when they're working with finance. And essentially, when they are programming using spreadsheets, because spreadsheets are, at the end of the day, a programming language where instead of writing lines of code that you execute one by one, you are encoding the relationship between cells in two-dimensional space. So Sigma falls very much into that kind of tabular data category. And overall, most of the things that people have been doing when it comes to spreadsheets and AI has been about tabular data, essentially ignoring the formulas and working with the data as if they were CSV files.
So as I'm listening to you, I'm forming kind of a taxonomy myself in my head, right? So I think as you point out, spreadsheets are a form. It's a medium for programming, right? So people who are heavy spreadsheet users, you can regard them as programmers. They use a specific type of programming tool and programming language, right? So which are these series of formulas, right? So with that in mind, it seems like in this spreadsheet resurgence, there's a few categories. The first, as you point out, is like the data management, data engineer persona, which is the Sigma thing, which is we're doing spreadsheets. We're going to take spreadsheets, but we're going to let them scale. And then we can run reports and analytics with the emphasis that the spreadsheet serves as some sort of database, like you said, which, by the way, the people who use Excel, some of them have massive Excel spreadsheets anyway, right? So, and then the second group of people are the data scientists. So these are the people who are using spreadsheets to build complicated models and formulas. And so there's a wave of startups, like you said, who are kind of revisiting that, although I'm not exactly sure what they bring to the table, given that Excel and Google spreadsheets can do that as well. So maybe it's just a question of scale and speed. And then the third category would be developers who are not actually using spreadsheets, but they want access to spreadsheets in a deep way, which is where you come in, right? So basically, spreadsheets as a source of raw material for whatever downstream AI application you have. It could be RAG, it could be an agent, it could be whatever, but the spreadsheets themselves are like programs. It's like going into a GitHub repo, right, as an LLM and then providing answers to someone. So there seems to be a need for kind of not ignoring the fact that people have invested a lot of time into these spreadsheets, and so they are legitimate programs that can be mined and can be used and can be repurposed for this age of AI. So the question then, Yalmar, is how big is this market of each of these three markets that I described? You can end with your market, but then kind of give us a sense of how big each of these areas are.
Right. So, I mean, I guess what everybody has in mind here is that spreadsheet software is one of the most used software in the world. I mean, the numbers very hard to get by exact numbers, but there are certainly over 1 billion users of Excel and Google Sheets combined in the world. Probably there are about 1 billion users of Excel alone, and then there's quite a lot of overlap. A lot of people use both of these software solutions. So there's a huge user base out there. There's also an enormous base of existing data and business logic that already resides in spreadsheets in every single organization. I sometimes say as a quip, but I don't think it's far from the truth, that there's probably more proprietary business logic and data residing in an organization's spreadsheet than in the formal IT systems like the CRMs and the ERPs and all of those big IT systems that they have. And I think sometimes kind of we on the nerdy side of the business, on the techie side, we overlook how important spreadsheets are on the business side. And when it comes to the users, there's obviously a massive amount of users. There's obviously a massive amount of data that needs to be, or that needs to be made available in the new ways of working that we have with AI and automation and the like. But it's quite hard to quantify it, especially because spreadsheets software isn't sold per se. It's not sold as a standalone. It's sold as a part of the productivity suite. But in many ways, these productivity suites, they're the most important part. The productivity suites stand on the spreadsheet software. Now, there haven't been like specialty spreadsheets or spreadsheet contenders. Nobody has kind of really made a big dent. I mean, even if you have a few thousands of users, that's not a dent in such a big market. But they have found footing. And while you mentioned data scientists and kind of data engineers, they're obviously kind of the biggest part of the users are fairly casual. They're business users. They are maybe not even so well versed. And to them, data just means a spreadsheet. Like everything they do with data is in a spreadsheet. They've never thought of a different solution. Now, when I think about kind of what we are doing, making spreadsheets that have already been built using Excel and Google Sheets available to automation and AI, I look at it, the way I look at it is that, we see LLMs come around. They work out of the box with text. That's what they like. They are language models. Working with language is what they do at their core. And then we've been adding modalities. We've added images, we've added audio, we've added tabular data to some extent and code. And we see how with every new modality that's added, the usefulness, the utility of LLMs expands a lot. And I think, honestly, that spreadsheets are probably the most important modality that is still not supported by the LLMs. And the reason is, in order to run these spreadsheets, you need a spreadsheet engine. And spreadsheet engines are few and far between, and there aren't that many outside of them, outside of Excel and Google Sheets, meaning outside of Microsoft and Google. And we have built the most sophisticated independent spreadsheet engine in the world, and that's what allows us to solve these problems and bring that important modality into the AI first era.
By the way, when I said data scientists and data engineers, I meant analysts who are in effect kind of behaving like data scientists and data engineers because they have powerful spreadsheet tools, right?
Yes.
So let's dive a little deeper, right? So the premise here is I have a company where there's a lot of spreadsheets that are central to specific business processes and workflows that have been built, and we rely on them. But now I want to be able to use an LLM to basically analyze and take advantage of these spreadsheets the way an LLM can take advantage and use a GitHub repo or a program, right? So it's basically the spreadsheet is basically more than the individual cells and more than the entries in the cells. It's the actual program that the analyst has painstakingly built, right? So given that that's what you do, give us one or two examples or use cases to make this come alive, to make the notion of why is it important for an LLM to really go into these spreadsheets?
Right. So if you think, let's take the LLM case as an example. Like, why would you want to use spreadsheets as a part of an LLM setup inside of your organization? Now, what is it that you bring in terms of text documents? What do you bring into an LLM? You bring your most important documents. You bring the product sheet, the white papers, marketing materials, and so on. Well-prepared text that is used over and over inside of the organization. Similarly, which spreadsheets in your organization are used over and over again? These are spreadsheets that may have been around for years. They may even have been around for decades in some form. They keep evolving. And they are spreadsheets that have to do with your pricing, with ROI calculations, helping your customers understand why they should buy your solution. They are also spreadsheets that have to do with day-to-day operations. HR has a bunch of spreadsheets about salaries and about vacation rights and stock options and all sorts of other things. There are also in finance, we don't even have to kind of dive too deep there. And every day, like every organization has almost this fabric of spreadsheets. Some are just, ad hoc made ones for a very small, back of the napkin calculation. But those spreadsheets that become a part of a workflow, they're built by someone, maybe they are built or have evolved by, several people within the organization over time. But then many other people are using them. So the salespeople are bringing up the ROI spreadsheet to help explain to their customers. Every time you make a quote, the pricing spreadsheet is brought up, and so on. So these are the types of spreadsheets that need to be brought into the LLM world, because without them, you cannot talk about pricing, you cannot talk about ROI, you can talk about benefits, you can talk about your stock options, and so on. So let's take a couple of examples that we have seen in our.
So Hjalmar, so the key here for our listeners is it's not necessarily the case that these spreadsheets are outward facing towards customers and consumers. It could be internal knowledge workers who need to interrogate these spreadsheets, but these spreadsheets are central to kind of the internal knowledge of a company, right?
Yes, yes, but both are possible. Outward-facing spreadsheets would, for example, be if you want let's say that you wanted an agent on your website to be able to answer pricing questions. Then you don't want the LLM to be making up the pricing. You actually want to calculate the pricing using reliable, verifiable calculations from an underlying spreadsheet. But majority of things that spreadsheets are used for are internal facing. So they are the types of spreadsheets that I mentioned before. And if we talk about,
But they can be internal with external implications, like you said, right? So I
yes,
could be interrogating a spreadsheet to answer a question for a prospect.
absolutely, and they could be internal facing, but still have a significantly large audience within the organization. So made by one or two people, but used by a large group. I'll give you a couple of examples of things that we've seen over the last couple of months as we have been kind of running through our alpha program of this new solution. So one of my favorite examples was a small restaurant chain called Joe and the Juice. They are kind of in the Nordics, and we have been working with one of the branches to set up automation for catering solutions. So they tend to get these emails, and the email says, I have a meeting tomorrow. There are 50 people coming. 10 of them are vegetarian. Like, you have all these, and some of them have, maybe there are some specific wishes in there, and so on. So the LLM is great at taking that chunk of text and figuring out parameters when it has been told what to look for. Now, they already had a spreadsheet. What was happening behind the scenes, the back office, if you want, in that restaurant was already kind of looking at that email and then plugging numbers into a spreadsheet to be able to do two things: to be able to quote them, to give them a price and send back, but also to be able to make sure that they order everything that they need to fulfill the shipment the day after, or whenever they are supposed to kind of deliver the catering. What we did there is that we take the text, we allow them to kind of copy the text from the email, paste it into, and we actually do this through custom GPT and ChatGPT. They paste the text in there. That is connected to the spreadsheet that they already had using our solution. So they have put that spreadsheet up as a service, connecting that to using function calls to the ChatGPT, and then the spreadsheet gets filled out automatically. If it needs any additional information, it can actually prompt the user that pasted in the information for what it should do. But then it spits out, on the one hand, a PDF, very professionally looking PDF with an offer to the customer, and on the other end, it adds on to the grocery list for the people that have to buy thing for the day after. And this is kind of something that happens almost instantly and is now kind of AI accessible, which before was a kind of pretty long-winded process of taking the email, figuring out where to put all the numbers, running it, sending back an email with the offer, and making sure that the order went through. So that's kind of one example of a workflow that's already using a spreadsheet. And the reason they use a spreadsheet is that's what small businesses do. They are run on spreadsheets, quite literally. And here we are able to make that AI accessible using very kind of simple set of tools that are accessible to everyone. So that's one example in a smaller business. We could talk about other examples on the pricing front, for example. But
So I guess Hjalmar, so the typical scenario is there's some important set of spreadsheets that
mhm,
someone in a company has already painstakingly built. It's
yep,
already being used internally, but maybe it's not as accessible because you need to be familiar with how the spreadsheet works and things like that, right? So, but the
mhm,
point is that you come in after the spreadsheet has been built, and you can now make this spreadsheet accessible to anyone generally, right? Because it'll now
yep,
be a natural language interface. So it could be a natural language interface that someone can interrogate directly, or it could be something that an agent interrogates, right?
yes.
But the
Uh,
the point the point is that you are taking advantage of something that someone has already kind of built, and people are already relying on. It's just that it's a little harder to rely on it when you're not familiar with the spreadsheet, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there are two important things that we bring to the table. One is turning the spreadsheet into a web service, as I mentioned before. The other is looking through the spreadsheet and turning cell references, there's a number in a value in a cell somewhere, into something that you can refer to using natural language. Because usually, so there's no metadata on the cell. The cell just has a number in it. But usually there are some labels or something that helps humans understand what the number is about, the surrounding that number. That can be actually fairly complicated. There are no rules how you do that, but humans tend to be fairly good at figuring that out. So what we do is we pass that through both heuristics and AI to figure out the right labels, the right metadata to put on those cells. The cell is no longer cell B4. The cell is now monthly price per seat, or something of that sort. And that is so on the one hand, you have the spreadsheet now as a web service available 24/7 for querying and even in a scalable fashion. And on the other hand, you have a way to expose the spreadsheet to an LLM so that people can use natural language to refer to the values instead of having to know where to put the values or open up the spreadsheet. There's also another important part about the types of spreadsheets you mentioned that people aren't necessarily familiar with them. The other danger that I know that spreadsheet modelers, the ones that make the spreadsheets, are always worried about. They're worried about people, destroying their spreadsheet, overwriting a formula or kind of doing something wrong in the spreadsheet. So they try to make them very easily accessible. You come up with all sorts of rules around versioning and so on. This is all taken care of. You have a deployed version of your spreadsheet, and that is the one that is being used inside of the LLM. You then keep working on the spreadsheet, and when you have a new version ready, you can switch out the deployed version, the production version. So we're making spreadsheets more like, they are already programs, they are already code, but recreating the logic in even a fairly simple spreadsheet using any other programming language is a big task. Also, if you did that, you would have to have a programmer redo every change that is made to the spreadsheet by the business user in that programming language. So it's much easier to take that, allow the business user to build and maintain the spreadsheet, whereas you kind of as someone responsible for the IT, you can deploy that spreadsheet, have it up and running in production, and then you don't have to worry about about the changes that happen. The business user just continues doing that as they've always done.
Now, what I'm about to say, I'm not endorsing per se, but
Okay.
but I believe this still happens inside companies where you have these spreadsheet wizards, right? So where it's actually not just one spreadsheet, you have a spreadsheet that relies on other spreadsheets.
Yes.
So is this still something that happens commonly? And if it does, do you folks address this scenario?
Yeah, so we see this quite a lot. It's actually very interesting that this seems to be most prominent in the finance industry or in finance, either as a finance whether as a function or as an industry, where people do these long chains of spreadsheets that rely on each other. You don't see it as much in other parts of an organization and other industries, probably for some historical reasons. But it is a wonderful way still for one domain expert to build on the expertise of another domain expert within the same organization. So it is empowering. And this actually comes to, I mentioned before, the sophistication of our spreadsheet engine. There are a few engines out there, some of them open source, some of them closed source, that are fairly good at simple spreadsheet. But when it comes to things like cross workbook references, that's what you are referring to here, named ranges, number formatting, recent functions like lambda and let that essentially turn spreadsheets into very powerful tools for much more serious computing as well. Iterative calculations, goal seek, these are all features that advanced spreadsheet users make use of, and you want your spreadsheet engine to be able to really make use of all of these, and that's what we bring to the table. We've actually, so kind of a little bit of a backstory here.
Which means, Hjalmar, which means that I can ask questions of a spreadsheet that relies on multiple other spreadsheets, and you folks have a good understanding of what's happening under the covers in the spreadsheet.
Yes. Well, one of the avenues that I'm super interested in diving in further, actually. So if we talk a little bit about how spreadsheet engines work in general. So spreadsheets are, we all know them as these two-dimensional grids, essentially, where we can type any value into any cell, and then we can create formulas that tie those cells together. When those are calculated, they are turned into dependency graphs. So essentially, at the bottom of the chain, of the bottom of the calculation chain, or top, if you want, you have the inputs. These are the values that are inputted. They don't rely on any other values in the spreadsheet. They drive all calculations everywhere else in the spreadsheet. Then you have this kind of dependency graph that can become very large, and then at the end you have an output. Now, the output itself may not be the most important single value in the cells. Often there are intermediate results. Let's say that you have a budget. It's not necessarily just the bottom line for the year. It's a very important number, but more important is maybe looking at how the revenue is growing throughout the year, or when you have with the cash flow position at different points in the year and so on. So these intermediate calculations are super important as well. Now, we run these dependency graphs, and these dependency graphs can be cross workbook, as we talked about before. And then we assign these natural language metadata to every cell and every range within that calculation. So you can ask for things like, if interest rates go down 1 percentage point, how does that affect our lowest cash position, and when will that happen? So those are the types of questions you can ask. The answer is already been modeled, meaning the LLM isn't hallucinating, the LLM isn't coming up with the calculation to do this. It's essentially plugging the numbers, like the new interest rate numbers in that case. It's plugging that into the right cell, some other inputs, and maybe something that you have said previously in the conversation, also plugging that into the right inputs in the model, and then giving you that cash flow output or whatever else you asked for. So I sometimes find it funny when people are saying that they have improved mathematics in LLMs. We have software that can run calculations 100% accurately. Even though pocket calculators could do that in the past. What is new here is that we can ask those calculators, we can ask our spreadsheet to do things using natural language, but then there is no need to reinvent how these models are made, because these are tried and tested methods of making the models.
So what you described is what people would call what-if scenarios, right? So what if I change interest rates to this, and then you folks can basically through natural language, I can answer this question and get an accurate answer back, or an answer based on my trusted spreadsheet, right? And so
Yes.
what about actual simulations? Can you do?
Mhm.
I guess you're limited by what the spreadsheet is doing, right? So if the
Yes.
spreadsheet uses some sort of solver, so for our listener, solver would be some sort of optimization algorithm, right? So where you have a bunch of variables, and then Excel has a plugin that uses an optimizer to find out the optimal set of parameters, right? So
Mhm.
anything that the spreadsheet is doing, you are able to do.
Yes, exactly. And things like you mentioned solver, sensitivity analysis, goal seek. These are all kind of advanced ways of getting answers out of your model that isn't just like a single answer. You're kind of exploring a little bit of a you're
Parameter
exploring
space.
the dimensions of possibilities in there. We have, and we're also using the engine, not in that case, not in an LLM, but more in a pure automation fashion. We're using that for a customer in the UK, where we are running simulations where we put a range of inputs in there. It's not a Monte Carlo simulation, but similar to
But
a Monte Carlo simulation.
but the key here is the person can describe what they want in natural language, right?
Yes, exactly. And then we can run 10,000 iterations over the spreadsheet and give them a distribution of outcomes instead of just a single outcome as well.
So before you folks existed, if I wanted to interrogate my spreadsheet in the scenarios we just described, right? So I have a trusted spreadsheet with really well crafted, well curated, and validated formulas. I want to interrogate. What were my options in natural
So,
language? Were there
well,
none?
in natural language, the option was having the modeler, with you essentially. Like the modeler was the human interface to his model or his or her model. So you would ask, we've all been in the meeting where somebody asks a question and then, oh, we'll have to rerun the numbers and come back to you next week. Like that is the type of translation that happens. And spreadsheets, and this is what I've been working on for the last 5 years. So is essentially how we make spreadsheets more accessible to an audience that isn't the modeler but still needs to kind of have access to the logic. And that is, being able to answer that question on the spot, being able to answer questions without necessarily having the spreadsheet modeler available to you, and more importantly, being able to expose an interface. In the case we've been talking about, mostly natural language interface, so that people can't destroy. They can't ruin the calculations. But they can be using reliable results from them. And importantly, and actually, you kind of alluded to this previously. One of the things that we can also do is that we can explain to the user how we got to the result we did. So in the interest rate example that I gave before, you would be able to say, oh, explain to me what you did. And then it will actually tell you, oh, I took the interest rate that you mentioned, I put that in this cell. I then, ran the calculation and I gave you back the results from this range on, another sheet in the spreadsheet, so that people can, the calculations are already reliable, but they can verify that their natural language queries were understood in the way that they needed. This is something that we believe and we see that people use while they're getting used to it, while they're learning to trust it. And it's very important while they're learning to trust it, because now you have kind of removed the spreadsheet, you've removed the spreadsheet interface from their face. But when they have gotten to the rhythm of using this, and they see that it actually understands them quite well, and they are doing similar things with the spreadsheet over and over, it's good to know that the explanation is there. But they don't have to bring up the explanation, because they know what's happening behind the behind the sheets now.
Yeah, it seems like this is such a critical piece to making agents in the enterprise interesting, right?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
spreadsheets are hidden, not hidden, but they are important stores of knowledge, right?
They really are. They
And then
really are.
the knowledge they store are usually created by domain experts who are not
Hmm.
programmers. And there's
They
more, and
yeah,
there's more of those in an enterprise than programmers and developers.
Definitely. There are probably an order of magnitude more people that develop that write formulas in spreadsheets than have ever written code. So about 10 times more. That is, I think, an estimate that would hold up quite nicely. Now, they aren't all making sophisticated programs, but the most sophisticated modelers are doing things that you would have to be a very sophisticated programmer to be able to do the same thing. The thing is that this is a domain. This is kind of a domain specific language, and the better you get at spreadsheets, the kind of deeper you go into that domain. So a good spreadsheet modeler is, it requires just the same type of logical thinking and so on as a developer. However, they don't necessarily have the same DevOps and kind of production environments around them. And in some ways, that is what we are bringing to the spreadsheet world.
So, at the risk of dating myself, back in the day when I worked in a hedge fund, there were the analysts were using things like VBA, Visual Basic for Applications, and macros.
Yes.
And basically, these are essentially programs inside the spreadsheet. So, do you folks address these kind of mini programs inside the spreadsheet? And by the way, is VBA still a thing?
VBA is still a thing. It still exists. It's still supported in the latest versions of Excel. It's not supported in Google Sheets. They went with different scripting inside of Google Sheets and Google Docs in general, AppScript. But on the matter of VBAs, a lot of VBAs are actually used to create user interfaces. They're used to make buttons do something. Used to kind of essentially create a UI within the interface. We have been solving that for our entire existence. We have been solving that by allowing people to build a web UI on top of the spreadsheet. So you don't need the VBA for that. However, if you're using VBA to write custom functions, which some people do and have done in the past, that is something that we don't support now. But the thing is, Excel is moving to Python. So Excel has been supporting Python, at least the what do they call it? The early release version of Excel has had Python support for a couple of years now, and that is where they are moving with Excel in general. So VBA is on the way out, but there's a lot of VBA that has been written and is already there. And then Python is coming in instead. Now we will probably support both at some point, but we will probably lean towards where the world is going rather than where it's coming from, especially because we replace so much of the VBA functionality with UI components that we already provide in our solutions.
So one of the things that end users of LLM seem to appreciate is some level of transparency, explainability, and basically some sort of thing in the user interface that reassures them that in fact what they're getting makes sense and should be trusted. So what are you folks doing along these lines?
Right. So I mentioned before how you can ask the LLM to explain what it did, and then it will talk you through how it understood your last query. It essentially understood, the interest rate to be, the interest rate in cell B5, and then, the cash position to be the range that is somewhere else in the spreadsheet itself. We are putting into the LLM solution also ways to return the parts of the spreadsheet that are relevant. So if people are in some cases, you actually want to distance the spreadsheet. You just want to be able to answer questions in natural language. Let's say, a pricing agent on your website. You don't want, they shouldn't even know that there's a spreadsheet. They should just get reliable answers. But when you are more maybe interrogating a spreadsheet that or you have access to, then being able to see the relevant parts of the spreadsheet with the changed results is something that we believe strongly in as well. So our API solution now returns, and can return parts of spreadsheets, and we are giving the LLMs instructions to be able to show those images at the right places so that you can actually see what happens, what changes were made, and where they were made. And again, this is very much at the verification stage while you're still kind of getting to know it. Probably for most use cases where a spreadsheet is widely used within an organization, you want to set this up, and you may use this functionality while you are still making sure that everything works as intended. But then you probably want to remove this, and you just want the salespeople to have access to a sales assistant that can help them do reliable quoting within the discount within the discounts that they are allowed to give, and so on, without thinking too much about how those numbers, like the numbers need to be reliable, they need to be the right numbers, but the salespeople don't care too much where they come from as long as they know that they can trust them.
So is your sweet spot, Hjalmar, essentially, is basically, as we've been discussing, the analytics and the formulas inside the spreadsheets? In other words, if I have a spreadsheet that one sheet in the spreadsheet is actually some data, and then another sheet is the actual model and the formulas, right? So can I interrogate the data as well? Like, I'm not sure what the interrogation would be. Might be, how many different countries are represented in your model?
Yep.
Like that.
So we do as well as anyone with tabular data, and to some degree, because we focus on spreadsheets, we will know a little bit more about how to read the values from a spreadsheet, things, for example, about dates and so on, than often when you try to work with them directly, and the LLM is treating them as they were CSV files, but just marginally. So we do as well as anyone with tabular data. The types of questions, the types of interrogation you want to do on tabular data is the types of questions you ask a BI system. Like, you essentially want to filter, sort, aggregate, and group things, and that is kind of that allows you to know
or in the context of a spreadsheet, I just want to know, for example, I want you to give me an approximate price for this item. And by the way, so how many countries does your model represent as far as this item is concerned, right? So something like that, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Absolutely. So these types of questions, absolutely, but our bread and butter, meaning our strong differentiation, is as soon as there's a formula in the spreadsheet, then we leave everybody else in the dust because they don't have spreadsheet engines integrated with their LLMs.
Yeah, it's incredible. Well, I think I may have mentioned this to you, but there was a research project called Spreadsheet LLM. Does it not do what you're doing?
So Spreadsheet LLM is a research project from Microsoft. That, as well as pretty much everything else that's been done inside of the traditional spreadsheet software, is all about tabular data once again. Actually, for most of the things that you can do with Copilot inside of Excel, and we can talk about kind of how having something available to you inside the spreadsheet is very different than having the model available in a larger LLM environment. But inside of Excel, most of the valuable things you can do today is either you can get a help with writing a singular formula, so that is where they touch formulas, or you can do aggregations or ask questions of tabular data. There's very little in terms of what they are doing with the models and the modeling itself. Which is, again, I expect that to come, and I expect that to be what the spreadsheet modelers will use in the future. Like I said before, I think the contender spreadsheets will have a very hard time getting people out of Excel and Google Sheets into something else to build their models. But once their models are built, making those models available in a completely different environment using AI and automation is what we believe needs to be bridged in order to get kind of spreadsheets into the AI first era.
So I guess, is there a scenario that you see where spreadsheets go away, which might impact you? In other words, the same nerds in finance who are painstakingly building financial models using spreadsheets, they can just bypass spreadsheets altogether.
Yes, and I think this is how this will happen. So I think right now, spreadsheet modelers they're going to have a job for a good amount of time. However, when the generation that grows up AI first, there are a lot of people now that turn to ChatGPT or other similar solutions for their answers before they go to Google. they will expect to be able to work with a lot of their digital assets and digital landscape through those types of queries, whichever environment will be on the top. We can debate that at another time. But they will expect to be able to use this type of way to do everything they do with computers. And they will expect
wait a minute. They still have to go to school to study accounting and finance, and
they do.
in I assume in those classes they'll still have income statements and P&Ls, right? So
Definitely. But hear me out. So let's say that when somebody growing up AI first starts their first business, maybe without going to business schools, because
Yeah.
that's what a lot of us entrepreneurs do.
Yeah.
They may never have seen a spreadsheet. That is what I've seen with a lot of young entrepreneurs. They've never built a spreadsheet, but now they have to build their first business model.
Yeah.
They will expect to be able to go to an LLM and say, "Can you help me build my business model?" And then we need to be ready. A solution needs to be ready to help them actually not only access a model, but to build a model from scratch. LLMs are already pretty good at teasing out what sort of input you should have, like what you should be calculating. And if you go through this with from scratch with something like ChatGPT or Claude today, they will actually build Python code that kind of resembles a model, but it won't be quite as flexible, and especially it won't be. It will be much more of a black box than the spreadsheet, because one of the strengths of the spreadsheet is how visible everything is while you're building things out. And the Python code isn't there. But I am certain that if the spreadsheet, the spreadsheet hasn't been replaced for 40 odd years, but if at some point something replaces it, it will be an AI first modeling solution. This is something we've thought quite a lot about. I think we know how it should be done, but we see a lot more opportunities in the short run in making spreadsheets that have already been built available to the AI and automated world.
And by the way, whatever it is in the future that either replaces or enhances spreadsheets, I think the main thing that you point out is the interface, the user interface of the spreadsheet is really what makes it popular, is because you can see your work, you can see how things, one cell impacts the other. So that kind of even if I can describe exactly what I want in natural language, I want that kind of interface in the end where I have complete visibility into the model and to how it works and so on, right?
Yes, and you want to understand your model. You don't want an LLM to build you a black box that comes back with the answers. You want to know what it has built, how the logic in that model ties together, and then and only then, when you've iterated on that and gotten a full understanding of how the model works, are you willing to kind of ask it questions without kind of going through all these steps. So that understandability can't go away either.
Yeah, and right now that understandability is communicated through cells, tables, and rows.
Yes.
It could be a
Yes.
graph in the future, right?
It could be a graph. The dependency graph I mentioned before, that essentially a spreadsheet engine turns the cells and the cell references and formulas into a dependency graph, is a very interesting artifact. It can be made so no spreadsheet engine makes this visible. We have internal tools that make this visible, and we have toyed with making that externally visible as well, and we will at some point soon. But these are super interesting ways to look at your model, because they will show you exactly what flows into which calculations, which inputs affect which parts of the model, and with the proper metadata attached to it, you can actually see, like in natural language, you can see the labels that seats. Let's take a very simple example. If you have kind of you have seats and price and the number of subscriptions, these three things are multiplied together into a price, and that gets very visual. And if you have the natural language labels on each of these nodes, you can almost you can just read through it. And I think that the future may actually lie in that you will be, when you are interacting with a model, when you're building a model from scratch in an AI solution, you will actually be iterating on a dependency graph. that can then be turned into something that maybe resembles a spreadsheet or resembles kind of a tabular way of showing the data that allows you to understand what's going on. Because the dependency graph, even though it's helpful, is less understandable than what we have, when the spreadsheet grid fills out the screen.
All right, so let's close by bringing it into the near future.
Yes.
So next 6 to 12 months, what's on the roadmap?
So we are releasing a commercial version of our solution in February. So currently in alpha, we've been running that. We have about 200 POCs that we are working towards in January, and from that we have learned a lot, both about how we get people to trust these calculations, what sort of use cases they want to automate, and so on. So that is the next big step out there. We are very eager to get this in front of business users. So we have been, working in particular on an API solution, like an API interface that lends itself well to function calling from, custom GPTs and ChatGPT. The MCP solution that Anthropic just released is super interesting, but still just local. It's still just supported locally. And then the function calls that come from assistants and other things that are made by developers, but used by end users, business users, and even customers. This is our focus, to get it to get the function calls. So essentially, whereas the LLMs have a Python runtime engine to run Python code, we give them an API environment to run spreadsheet code using a spreadsheet engine. So we have a runtime engine for spreadsheets, you have a runtime engine for Python, and we are bringing the latter via an API collection. The other, like if we look half a year into the future, if you look at what's happening right now in the LLM environment and you squint, you can see how things like artifacts and canvases and the like are bringing a little bit richer user interfaces into the chat. So it's no longer just, I say something, the LLM says something, and that's how we interact. They're bringing up artifacts that we can iterate on. I think that it's quite likely that the LLM environments will move into a direction where they will make these interfaces richer, and they will even allow other application developers to develop plugins into that. And that becomes super interesting to us because we already have a suite of UI components that can make spreadsheet models interactive. You can have charts, you can have sliders that move the individual inputs, and buttons that change scenarios, and all sorts of things like that. So I can totally see that in the next 6 to 12 months we will have an opportunity to work with some integration. We'll see some early stages of this where we'll be able to kind of deliver a little bit richer UI interface into the LLM, because I think, again, the big thing that's happening with LLMs is that we can now instruct computers to do things in our language instead of them having to learn their language to instruct them what to do. But the reality is that for a lot of our tasks after that, at some point, having a richer UI that you can point and click and look at more visually is better than using a language alone. So I think we will see something move in this direction. So, commercial launch February, and that is all about exposing through function calls, but then richer UI integration into LLM environment is kind of the step after that.
So just to clarify, in closing, in February, anyone can use Grid, which you can find
Yes.
grid.is.
Yes.
So which means, so what would be the typical workflow in February? I have a spreadsheet that I meticulously created in Excel, and then I can upload it into Grid and then make it available.
You can upload it into Grid, and thereby you get an API endpoint that you can use to interact with it using a function call. But you can actually, if it's a cloud workbook, if it's a cloud spreadsheet, Google Sheet, or an Excel file living in OneDrive or Dropbox, you can connect it live. So any change you make to the spreadsheet makes its way to the LLM right away. Any addition to a row in the spreadsheet is already available for you to reason over.
And this
in
is
the
in
LLM.
this is in February.
This is all already available. We are in an alpha program. Everybody is welcome to sign up for the alpha program, but we do more of a hand-holding at the moment. But by February, this will be a self-service solution that anybody can sign up for and start using right away.
And again, listeners, check out grid.is. If you are building agents for enterprise, I think you would be remiss to not make sure that you are investigating Grid, because as we have hammered home in this episode, spreadsheets are massively important inside many enterprises. And with that, thank you, Hjalmar.
Thank you, Ben.